We have reached the 28th, the final chapter of the book of Acts. And if you'll turn with me to chapter 28, and we'll begin with verses 1 and 2. And when they were escaped, then they knew that the island was called Melita. And the barbarous people showed us no little kindness, for they kindled a fire and received us every one because of the present rain and because of the cold. The island of Melita today is known as Malta. Malta is an interesting little island. It's not real big. It's come into the news recently because of a television show called Oak Island. And they have considered the real possibility that the Malta Knights, which were associated with the Templars, had something to do with Oak Island, but be that as it may. Notice it says the barbarous people showed us no little kindness. We need to remember that the term barbarian or barbarous, those terms don't refer to somebody that's like a wild animal, that is uncivilized. What it actually means, or how it was used in that time, was to designate people who did not speak the common language, that is, Greek. And so anytime you see that in the scriptures, barbarian, barbarous, etc., it's referring to people who did not speak the common language. The people of Malta were Phoenician. Originally came from Carthage and settled on the island and kept moving toward the east coast of the Mediterranean and became what we know more today as the Philistines. And the word kindness, it comes from a word that is philanthropia. Now, you can probably guess the word that we have in our language today. Strong says this word means fondness of mankind. Zojates defined it as human friendship, philanthropy, and that's where we get our word philanthropy from, benevolence or kindness. So it's showing that they treated them well, they took care of them. This love for mankind, it is not just, oh, I love human beings. It carries more an idea of it provides for the needs of human beings. It loves them enough to provide for them when they have a need, and especially with regard to the idea of distress. So philanthropy is not just somebody who loves people, who maybe does some nice things for people, but it's a person who will do nice things, good things, helpful things to those who are in distress. So what did they do that showed their love for these people? Remember, they'd just been shipwrecked. They had lost everything. The rains were pouring down, and you and I have many times probably experienced the kind of thing that happens right now outside. There's a chill in the air. Why? It's mostly because there's a wind blowing and it's dampness. And so you can imagine how these folks who had just survived the shipwreck have been feeling. They're wet, they had to swim to shore, it's chilly, it's cold because of the rains, and they would probably be pretty miserable. These barbarous people kindled a fire. And being drenched, this would have been a real comfort to them. Probably all of us have expressed or experienced rather a time when we were wet and chilly, and boy, didn't it feel good to get in front of a fireplace or to get a nice quilt and wrap it around you and start getting some of that warmth. And so they welcomed all of these survivors. But look at verse 3 and 4. This is a very interesting passage to me, because when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire, there came a viper out of the heat and fastened on his hand. And when the barbarians saw the venomous beast hang on his hand, they said among themselves, "No doubt this man is a murderer, whom though he hath escaped the sea, yet vengeance suffereth not to live." Now, notice first of all what Paul did. He wasn't going to sit back and allow others to wait on him. He was gathering a bundle of sticks, and he laid that bundle on the fire. We should always think about the helpfulness of Paul. We're not here to be served. You and I are here to be servants to God, first of all, to our brethren, second of all, and to the world in general around us, people that we meet every day. We're to be servants. Now notice Paul was following a principle here that really should be adhered to by every Christian. It's a principle that I see in 2 Thessalonians 3 and verse 10. Paul told the people that when he was with them, he commanded them to do something, that if any would not work, neither should he eat. Now notice the emphasis, would not work. There are those who cannot work, and those people we need to be taking care of to the best of our ability, if we have the ability, to take care of their needs. But if a person can work and will not work, refuses to work, don't give them food. If we do that, we've broken God's commandment that was given by the Spirit through the Apostle Paul. In Ephesians 4 and verse 28, we're told, "Let him that stole steal no more." Well, why? But rather let him labor, working with his hands that which is good. Notice that. Labor with his hands. Just any kind of labor? No. Labor which is good. Who determines what's good? God does. I couldn't labor. Many years ago when I had a period of unemployment, so to speak, I went to an agency that tries to help you find work, and I filled out all the paperwork and everything, and the only job I was offered was to drive a beer truck. A Christian can't do that. We can't drive a beer truck. That's promoting that which is evil in the eyes of God. But notice why we're to work with our hands, and why we're to work with our hands doing that which is good, that we may have to give to him that needeth. We're to be servants. We're to be people who try to the best of our ability to help those who are in need. And notice it says, give to him that needeth. Doesn't have the ability, doesn't have what is required to help have good health, to promote good health, etc. A society which is a welfare society, which many in this country have become a welfare society that will not work, are foolishly sinning against God, and those who help them in their evil, their sin, are just as guilty as those who refuse to work and mooch off of everybody else. But notice when Paul put these sticks that he'd gathered on the fire, something happened. A viper came out of the heat. Notice how that's worded. A viper came out of the heat. A viper. Why didn't the viper bite Paul when he picked up the sticks to begin with? You ever thought about that? Why did he wait until he put them on the fire to bite Paul? Well, when reptiles are cold, they become less active. And they'll become, if it gets cold enough, even dormant. That's why when you may be out in cooler weather and more like cold fall, you go out and you might see a reptile, a snake, sunning itself on a rock. What is it doing? It's gathering the heat from the sun in order to allow it to be able to move more rapidly and to get its prey to eat. And so Paul places the sticks on the fire. The viper comes out of that pile of sticks and bites Paul. And notice the language that's used, fastened on his hand. In other words, the viper didn't just strike him and pull back. The viper fastened, held on to his hand. A lot of people don't realize that most rattlesnake bites never inject venom. I saw on a National Geographic special talked about this. Most rattlesnake bites never inject venom. And the reason is because they're just as startled as you were to come up on them, and they just strike out and they pull back. But if a snake, a poisonous, venomous snake, bites you and holds on those venom sacs in its head, just pump the venom in. And so when you look at this, you're seeing a very detailed explanation of what happened when Paul placed those sticks on the fire, what that poisonous snake, probably an adder, had done. Look at the detail. Think about it. This wasn't just luck that Paul wasn't poisoned and died from that strike. What was the reaction of the people of Malta then when they saw the viper, the adder, probably again an adder, fasten on Paul's hand and hang on his hand? Notice that terminology that's used. Fastened on Paul's hand, verse 3, verse 4, hang on his hand. They said among themselves, no doubt this man was a murderer. He must have been somebody really terrible. He escaped the sea. He escaped death in the sea, but he just can't escape what's been done. They further reasoned something about this man, and notice it says, yet vengeance suffered not to live. Oh, he escaped the drowning, but he can't get away from the death sentence, in other words, that he deserves. And notice it says vengeance. Now, who has the New King James? Anybody have the New King James?
Vengeance.
It uses vengeance too. I forgot to look it up before I came. Some versions use another word there, justice. The word vengeance in our King James Bible is actually a name.
I'm sorry, it does say justice. I was in the other version. It does say justice in the New King James.
Okay. I thought it did. I thought I remembered that, but it's actually a name. It should be capitalized. Now, let me explain. Vengeance suffereth not to live. They're talking about a person. In those times of a lot of superstition, they would take an idea and they would personify it with the name of a person. Justice was personified as a person who was the goddess of justice, avenging justice. Her name was Dike, or some pronounce it Dike. She was the goddess of justice who was an avenging justice. In other words, she saw that those who deserved great punishment or even death got their comeuppance, so to speak. Kaufman defined it as Justilia of the daughters of Zeus and of the avenger of crime. Roper observed that pagan people often did this, and that's how they got their names for their goddesses and gods and etc. And so that helps us to understand, and again, it gives detail that Luke, a physician, would normally be involved with. Physicians have to pay attention to details. I remember not long ago, I had to go to my primary at the VA, and I was having a little trouble with my knee, and they had me take my shoes and socks off, and when I went to put them back on, I had to try and help my leg pick up to get it up high enough. And one of the nurses said to the newbie that they were training, "Did you catch what just happened?" "Oh yeah, I did." They pay attention to detail. And that's what Luke has done here. Why would the people of Malta jump to such a conclusion? Again, because they believed in the Roman and Greek hierarchy of gods and goddesses. And so they thought, oh, the gods are not going to, in this case, a goddess is not going to allow this guy to escape what he deserves. They very likely could see by looking at Paul that he was a prisoner. It may have been that he had some bonds on him of some kind. Not very likely, since I don't believe that was very likely, because they allowed them to swim to shore or to ride on boards and other wreckage from the shipwreck to get to shore. And chains would have been quite heavy and would definitely pull a person down. So in their minds, Justus used the viper to make sure that Paul didn't escape the penalty that he should have endured, that is, death. And you think about this. This concept was shared by many in Jesus' day, even among the Jews themselves, which should have known better. Look at John 9, verse 1 and 2. Jesus is passing by the multitudes and the people, and he saw a man which was born blind. Notice, blind from his birth. And his disciples asked Jesus a question. "Master, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" They thought sin had caused this man to be blind. Now, think about how ridiculous this is in one of the particulars of that lesson. This man, why he was born blind? What did he do wrong while he was in his mother's womb? Was it his parents? Now, sin can cause a person on the part of his parents to be born blind. That can happen because of drug use, alcohol use, which again is a drug. And I'm just been really tickled lately in the news how much information is now being put out that not even one drink of alcohol is good for you. They finally have reached their senses, and who knows? Maybe it will do some good. And in fact, they're talking about a lot of people have given up drinking alcoholic beverages and are starting to go to non-alcoholic beverages at parties and bars and stuff of this nature. Well, yep, as far as I'm concerned, yippee, that's great news. The apostles thought that this man was born blind because of sin. Not the case at all. Look at Jesus' reply in verse 3. "Neither hath this man sinned, nor his parents. Sin did not cause him to be blind, but that the works of God should be made manifest in him." He just happened to have been born blind. Nothing of a sinful nature had caused this man to be born blind. I remember reading one of the old preachers from way back in the 20s said, all accounts are not settled in this life. Paul wasn't guilty of sin. He wasn't a murderer like these islanders supposed. Look at verse 5 and 6. Paul shook off the beast into the fire and felt no harm. Howbeit they looked when he should have swollen or fallen down dead suddenly. But after they had looked a great while and saw no harm come to him, they changed their minds. And now they said, he's a god. Isn't that amazing? One minute he deserves death. He escaped death, but he couldn't get away with it. The next minute he's a god. He shook the beast off into the fire and felt no harm. I think this should remind us of what Jesus told his apostles in Mark 16, verse 17 and 18. He told them that these signs would follow them that believe. In my name, in Jesus' name, shall they cast out demons. Devils is actually demons. They shall speak with new languages, tongues. They shall take up serpents, and if they drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them. They shall lay hands on the sick, and they shall recover. Jesus gave the apostles miraculous abilities so that if they drank something that was deadly, it wouldn't kill them, wouldn't hurt them at all. If they picked up a poisonous snake and it bit them, wouldn't hurt them. What happened in our text? Paul had picked up a deadly snake. It had bit him, not just bit him, hung on to him. He shook it off into the fire, and when he should have started swelling up where that serpent bit him and even died, obviously a very deadly snake in their time, nothing happened to him. In Luke 10 and verse 19, behold, I give you power to tread on serpents, he told his apostles, and scorpions, and over all of the power of the enemy, and nothing shall by any means hurt you. Scorpions? Out west, that's something that's very, very familiar to people out there. There's a lot of scorpions out there. And even in Georgia, we have a lot of scorpions. And a lot of people have been bitten by it. And it's very painful and it's poisonous. But they won't hurt you. Serpents, they won't hurt you either. And even the power of the enemy, Satan, he can't hurt you either, as long as they hold on to faith. Their faith in God, their faith in the Lord, and we might add the Holy Spirit. So these islanders think, as they watched Paul and they saw no ill effect, they changed their minds about Paul. He's a god. Roper wrote something I thought was interesting here. He said, snake handling cults of today are misapplying the scriptures. Now, I would add to what he says there, they're not only misapplying the scriptures, but if they had not removed the venom sacs of the snakes that they handle, then they're testing God, as he went on to say. Matthew 4 and verse 7, Jesus was tested by Satan. And what did Jesus tell him? No, that's against God's laws, his rules, his thinking. You don't test God. And subjecting their bodies to unnecessary risk if they did handle actual poisonous serpents. these snake handlers, so to speak. You know, there's humor in a lot of things, and I remember listening to a Jerry Clower. He was a comedian. You know, Jerry Clower started out as a Baptist preacher, but he told so many jokes, everybody got to thinking about it and says, well, why don't you become a comedian? And he did, a very successful one. And I remember one of his tales that he told, talked about this church gathering that he went to, and all of a sudden they held up snakes. And what did he do? He ran through the back wall, made a big old door where none had existed before. I kind of think maybe if that was me, I might think the same thing and do the same thing. Who knows? In 1 Corinthians 3 and verse 17, God said, if any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy. Well, why did God say that? For the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are. As Christians, we are the temple of God. Isn't that interesting? A dwelling place. A temple is a dwelling place. It comes from a word that signifies either a temporary dwelling place or a permanent dwelling place. We're the temple of God. We are holy because we are the temple of God. Him dwelling in us. Well, if that's the case, I should never do something purposely that will harm that temple, the physical body in which God dwells. I should never purposely do anything that will harm the temple of God. These snake handlers, again, if they use a snake where the venom sac has not been removed, are testing God. They're putting themselves purposely in a position of harm, of possible harm. That doesn't talk about accidents where you're out playing with, say, basketball with someone, and an accident happens and your nose gets busted, which has happened to me several times, your jaw broken or some other limb of your body broken. Accidents happen, but we should never place ourselves permanently. I heard a story that illustrates this some many years ago. This back hills county was looking for a bus driver. And this bus driver was going to be transporting their children from out in the community into the school. And they had to drive on some dirt roads, and these dirt roads, some of them wound around mountains. And so they decided that there was a test they would take or give to find out who this bus driver was going to be. They had 3 applicants. Well, the first applicant, he got in the bus, and they took him out to this hill, and they said, now drive around this curve on this mountain. And they watched how he drove, and he drove about 3 feet away from the edge of the mountain, trying to show what skill he had. The second one thought, well, I can beat that. And he got within a foot of the edge of this cliff that would fall off the mountain. And the third one got up and into that bus, and he drove as close to the side of the mountain as he could possibly, in other words, as far away from the edge as he could. And guess who got the job? Would you want your children to be in one that took a chance of getting as close as he could to the edge, or the one who hugged the mountain? Well, as God's people, we need to be conservative in the way we act, talk, and just in general do things. We shouldn't be people who take chances with the body that God has given us, the temple that 1 Corinthians 3:17 says that He lives in. The temple of God is holy, which temple ye are. Let's look at verses 7 and 8 of our text. Oh, don't do that. Well, if it's not one trouble with these tablets, it's another, huh? And it came to pass that the father of Publius lay sick of a fever and of a bloody flux, to whom Paul entered in and prayed and laid his hands on him and healed him. So when this was done, others also, which had diseases in the island, came and were healed. Who also honored us with many honors, and when we departed, they laded us with such things as were necessary. Notice in the same quarters. Whose quarters? Publius's. This man Publius is also, we're also told, is of the chief man of the island. The word quarters is interesting. It comes from a word means topos. We get topography from this word. And what it refers to is something that is marked off, particularly a thing, a space, a place, or a region, or a district. Here was a man who had a place that was marked off just for him. Probably what we might call a palace or something of that nature with the grounds around it. It was his possessions. And that word is another word called rion, which shows that the word quarters, topos, is that there was an area of land that was marked off as his possession, a place where he lived. He's called the chief man, the protos. And what that means is first in rank, influence, and honor. This was an important man in this island. What we learn about Publius then is that he was rich, he had a lot of land, and he was the governor. The title, the chief man of the island, has been found on pottery and pieces of stone on the island of Malta. And it indicates that it was a Roman title signifying that he was the ruler or the governor of this island. His name is Publius. The name means popular. I found that kind of interesting. Obviously, he was popular. That would mean that he seems to be a man that was well respected and a man that was honest with the way he treated them and things of that nature. Often names back in that time were given to people to designate some special thing about them. The Indians in America often did this. They would watch a child, not give him a name for sometimes years, and watch the child and then give him a name. For instance, Panther. They may have called him Panther because of the way he moved, like a big puma, a mountain lion. Now notice what Publius did. He received us and lodged us 3 days courteously. Again, notice the detail. 3 days. Well, why is that important? Well, let's look at it in just a moment. But the word received means he entertained them. The original word talks about he entertained them. He welcomed them into his house, and he took care of them. He provided for them. Publius housed them for 3 days, but they spent 3 months on this island, did they not? And there are 276 people who were on that ship, counting the soldiers, their prisoners, any people who were just traveling on that ship, and the sailors, 276 people. And for 3 days, he showed them hospitality in his own home. Now they remained on the island for 3 months, according to verse 11, before they finally left this island. Publius personally housed them and quartered them, apparently until other arrangements could be made among the rest of the people on the island. But there was a problem in Publius's house. What was it? His father was sick. There were 2 things that were wrong with Publius. First of all, he had a fever, a fiery heat is the definition of the word that's used there for fever. But he also had what is called a bloody flux. Now, the original shows us that was dysentery, a bowel ailment that he had. But notice something, it wasn't just simply dysentery, it was a bloody dysentery. He was probably suffering from what is known as Malta fever. This was a disease that was common on the island of Malta and is even found there today. And it's caused by a microorganism that's found in the milk of the Maltese goats. And so this is something that's very serious. Even today, with our modern medicines, if a person gets dysentery, it can kill them. It is something that's very serious. You need to take care of it and find medical aid for it or medicines to get rid of this. Because even today, it's a very serious thing. So what did Paul do about this problem that Publius's father had? He entered in and prayed. He entered into the room where Publius was, and he prayed, and then he laid his hands on him and healed him. Look at the order that's presented to us. Paul went where he was. He offered prayer to God. He laid his hands on his father, and then he healed him. Consider how prayer is often linked in the Scriptures to miracles, especially those of healing. In Acts 9:36 forward. In Acts 20 and verse 10, you see the same thing happening. Prayer before a miracle was performed. Remember what Jesus told the 12 when he sent them out? Heal the sick, cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out demons. Freely ye have received, freely give. Paul didn't charge for the miracles that he did. Neither did any of the other apostles. Neither did any of the brethren who received the miraculous ability to heal people or cast out demons that were given to them through the laying on of the hands of the apostles. Freely you've received. You freely received this ability. Now use it. What chain reaction did Paul's healing of Publius's father cause? Others also on the island, which had diseases in this island, came and were healed. You know, you can't help but wonder how many of these people were healed in the 3 months that Paul and those with him stayed on this island. And not one single failure. Why? Because Jesus had promised there won't be any failure. You just lay your hands on them and you heal them. You cast out those demons. I read somewhere where someone thought everywhere that Jesus went in the Scriptures, in the first, what we call the first 4 books, or the Gospels of Jesus. Actually, every book in the Bible is the gospel. It's the good news of Jesus Christ. There was never anyone who was not healed who came into his presence. And on several occasions, Jesus did it from afar off. Distance meant nothing. Time meant nothing to God in the flesh, the God-man. He healed from afar. He healed in presence. Knowing Paul, I believe there's a conclusion which we can reach and without any doubt say was true. Everyone on that island learned about Jesus. Now, they may have rejected it, or they may have accepted it. Probably some of both. But there wouldn't be anybody in 3 months' time on that little island of 11 miles by 9 miles approximately that didn't learn about Jesus. And consider the gratitude of those who were healed had for Paul and that company. And those who were their relatives who showed this gratitude. They honored us, Paul and those with him, with many honors. And when we departed, they laded us with such things as were necessary. In other words, they provided them with everything they... Remember, these people had lost everything on that ship when it sunk. All they had were the clothes on their back. And these islanders, the whole time they were there with them, provided those things that they needed, provided them with clothing, housing, warmth, friendship, and they all heard the gospel. Can't help but wonder, in my mind, how many of those soldiers who had been so callous to begin with, so selfish in nature, also accepted the gospel. How many of those people on the island accepted the gospel? We'll never know this side of heaven. Maybe we won't know then. Maybe we'll never know all the things we'd like to ask Paul and Peter and all the rest of them. But I believe we can positively know they got what they needed, the good news of Jesus Christ. We'll come back with verse 11 next week.